Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Inside National Security by the National Security Academy. I'm Cassian Peña, and today I'm joined with my dear friend Dexter Ingram.
Hi, Cassian. Great to be here.
So, there's something very exciting happening at the moment, which is Dexter's new book launch. And he's launching a book called The Spy Archives. And it's been a book that, in a very short period of time, has truly gotten amazing reviews from many professionals within the field, many young people, very many veterans as well within the field too. So, which is so exciting to be part of this journey with Dexter too. So, I'd like you, Dexter, to speak a bit about the book, your thought process behind it, and maybe inform the people on a new read that they can buy for their shelf, right?
Thanks, Cassian. I'm super excited. This is the basically the promo copy. And when I got this, it looks great. I mean, I really had some amazing people working on this. The cover looks outstanding. And the book itself is called The Spy Archive: Hidden Lives, Secret Missions, and the History of Espionage. So much of what we take for granted every day now is actually being kind of formed by intelligence and spying throughout history. We see situations where groups who are outmanned and outgunned are winning because of intelligence and spying and spy networks and the importance of that. Spying saves lives, spying changes political boundaries, spying sometimes starts revolutions. So it's really interesting, a lot of fun. This was a pleasure to write. And I had some really good friends of mine on the back who made some blurbs. John Mendez, the chief of disguise for the CIA, had some really great things to say. And Chris Costa, executive director at the International Spy Museum and former National Security Council senior director for counterterrorism. So the book, it covers a lot of ground. We go all the way back to ancient Egypt, and then we kind of get all the way up to current day. And it's not just history. At the very end, we kind of highlight some ethical issues that we always have to consider when it comes to spying and surveillance and issues related to that. And we also kind of talk about the fictional aspect of that and how in some cases it's close to the real thing, in other places it's just entertainment.
I mean, it's so amazing. I had the chance to read it, of course, and the way it's written, I think, is a very unique way, which is why I think the audience will like it very much because it's very easy to read, yet very, with good content at the same time, and it's very sharp, very detailed as well, but it still always gives kind of that bird's eye macro picture, and there's many different stories mentioned, each a couple pages long. And I think it's very unique as well, the way it's written, like you mentioned, throughout different ages, centuries, and decades. So, Dexter, I'd first like to know what is the main reason for you to write this book, right? I mean, you worked within the State Department for a long time, you were within the FBI, et cetera, et cetera. But what inspired you to actually, I guess, continue with publishing or actually create your first book, right?
Yeah. So I've been a spy history buff for, gosh, 3 decades now. And I love the real stories. I love the inspiration. I love the underdogs. It's better than any fiction book that you can imagine. I mean, when you kind of tell these stories in a way that really highlights the situation, the people, the reality of the time, that says a lot. We take a lot for granted nowadays. But these women who were spy masters, 400, 500 years ago, were just overlooked. They weren't considered serious. So men would sit around and just say whatever they wanted to say, not knowing that the women that were pouring their wine or, bringing the food or whatever it may be were all spies. Sometimes it was their wives and spouses that were spies. And we see that also with groups like the Code Talkers who, had this forbidden language that the US tried to get rid of. They were actually punished for speaking this language in school, but they were so instrumental and so vital during World War II. They were Marines that were using their native tongue that allowed them to communicate in ways that the enemy couldn't understand. And to be very honest, they didn't have a lot of words for for issues like torpedoes or ships or tanks. So, instead of grenade, they would say, potato. So it's just really, really fascinating. You had so many people whose country didn't necessarily treat them with respect or fairly. Sometimes it was just almost genocide, but they still stepped up, you know?
That is so interesting, and the book definitely speaks about that as well. And we speak about it often in the podcast too, which is sometimes the people which are underestimated, right? They might be the best people to fill these positions, right? It's not always the things that we see in the movies, but rather in real life, it can be much more. Yeah, these groups of people, like you mentioned, women 400 or 500 years ago, that weren't seen like they could maybe be very effective, but actually they were maybe even the most effective in certain operations, right? And something I found interesting within the book, and I'd also like you to speak about, like you mentioned, is the ethical components, right? And you also speak about, for example, history within let's say 1940, etc., etc., and during different operations, and where I guess if it's the US or different global powers at the time used certain groups, even though they might not be the most moral group out there, but they used them because they were very effective at a certain thing. So, what's your opinion on all of that, and how did you analyze that?
Yeah, that was something that kind of jumped out at me during my time at Interpol. I was living in Lyon, France, and Lyon, France was part of Vichy France during World War II. You had basically German occupation there, and there was one really cruel German leader in particular, Klaus Barbie, who they called the Butcher of Lyon. He killed many resistance fighters, many French men and women. He killed Jean Moulin, who was kind of a leader of the movement at the time. And after the war, the Western civilizations kind of, used him and his influence and his expertise to further their desires. So there was no Nuremberg trial for him where he, was punished and sent off. And this is something that you always grapple with, right? Where is that line? How are we going to get the, I guess, just due for all those folks that were just cruelly mistreated and killed and murdered, families, and also pursue our goals as a Western civilization. So that's just one example. I mean, there are so many examples of those type of situations. And then when you also look at ethics, look at mass surveillance, look at those type of activities. Excuse me, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something, right? We do have a constitution. We do have the right to protest and to assemble, and we have the right to free speech. No search and seizure. There's so many pieces of our constitution that we always have to just keep in mind. There are countries out there that do surveil their people. They have throughout history, and that's a stifling effect, right? It's important that we follow the Constitution, the laws associated with that. We've made mistakes in the past, and then we also have partners that we work with around the world, right? We're supposed to share information. We're supposed to be able to communicate. For decades, I was working all around the world with our key partners and texting them and calling them and building that level of trust. And when you are surveilling your partners in a way that comes out to bite you in the butt at the end, that can have devastating effects too. And I'll say finally, if you aren't careful with the classified information that you have, partners aren't going to share with you. And you're not going to have people out there that want to put their lives on the line to accomplish whatever goal that you are trying to accomplish. We need spies all around the world. Most of the time, it's not some James Bond from America or the UK. It's that tailor in Pakistan. It's, the servant in Russia. It's the scientist in Germany back in World War II. I won't say Germany now. But yeah, it's really important to understand where those limits are and where that line is.
That is very interesting because I remember we speak about intelligence, for example, and spying, etc., often in the podcast, and we break it down in such a manner that it's not just maybe a pure spy for a certain thing, but rather gathering information, which sometimes might even seem like normal information. But if one kind of puts the puzzle together, and if there's a certain end to receive that information, then all of a sudden it becomes useful, right? So it doesn't always have to be this very big operation, but it can be something more undercover that in the end has a greater impact, right?
You're absolutely right. I'm going to move the camera for a second to show you something. One of the things I have on my wall right here, it says, "Bits of careless talk are pieced together by the enemy." And this is a puzzle, and it shows German ring, and it says convoy sails for England tonight. And it's just pieces of open source or unclassified information that they can put together that really shows something that is more significant. So you hit the nail on the head, Cassian. Absolutely.
Oh, that's amazing. And I remember back, this was, I think, around a month ago, where we met in DC and with the like a couple other people in the group as well. And we met as well, for example, at the Spy Museum. And you're, of course, very talented at showing around the Spy Museum about the different points of history. And you reference them, especially up to this point of day. And what do you think is like the most interesting story that captures most people's attention, or let's say young people's attention even more, right?
So one of the things that I love is talking to young people. Young people love the gross stuff sometimes. So when I say gross stuff, here's something that the CIA actually used in World War II. Excuse me, not in World War II, in the Vietnam War. The CIA used this in the Vietnam War. It's called the doggy-doo transmitter, and it looks like tiger poop. We couldn't see through the canopy of trees in Vietnam. Our satellites and airplanes couldn't penetrate it. So we would drop these things that look like tiger poop on the ground. Nobody messes with poop. Viet Cong, we would just walk past them. But what's inside of this is a seismometer. It tells you when Viet Cong are walking or moving equipment, and you can target them. So this is really fascinating, right? I love the gross stuff. Um, I also really like the ingenuity. This is this is a KGB cigarette case, which is actually a camera. You can open it up, and inside here, you have a camera that is right there. It could fall out if you open it up, but keeping it closed, you can still take pictures. This is actually from the KGB training facility in Kyiv, in Ukraine. And then you have great things that like items during World War II that we would use. This is a comb that we would ship to prisoners of war in the gulags and or the stalags, excuse me. And everything we shipped them had something they can use to escape in it. It had saws and money and compasses and you name it. Well, this right here has a compass inside of it. And I actually had my dentist x-ray this. And you could see the compass inside of it. And what you do is you'd break it open and use it to escape because we didn't have GPS back then.
Wow. And I think many people might be asking, so let's say if we look back at history, why would these groups first accept a delivery from, let's say, a foreign nation, which might be the biggest opponent or competitor at the time? Why would they allow that, I guess, their prisoners receive this in the first place?
That's a great question. It's not like your mom and dad are sending care packages, and it's not like this is from Uncle Sam. You would work with the suppliers who are supplying, equipment, information, shaving supplies to these prisoners. And the Germans and the Japanese would want these prisoners to be entertained. If you are entertained, you are less likely to cause trouble. So Monopoly sets, chess sets, checker sets, all those type of games would be sent to them, and they would have all kind of escape items inside. History is complicated, but like I said, there's so many stories that are better than fiction, better than any movie you can imagine. And I want people to see themselves in these situations. As I kind of served over the last 30 years, I've been in situations that I could never possibly imagine, things that when I debrief, it sounds fictional. But these stories are real. And I hope to motivate and inspire people. I hope young people can say, I can do that. And then you can also appreciate the bravery of others. I mean, there's a very diverse background of intelligent history here. It really does save lives. There were times where, you had these huge armies that were infiltrated that could have easily overrun or attacked and won any battle, but because they were infiltrated, the fight never happened. You know, the smaller teams always were one or two steps ahead, sometimes three or four steps ahead. So it's really fascinating. When I was in school and in grad school, I would always learn about, intelligence, military strategy, military history, those type of things. And, you would focus on one or two authors, you might talk about Sun Tzu, you might talk about Machiavelli. But there are folks out there like Genghis Khan who didn't write books, but created these huge transportation networks and allowed for information to be shared in a way that had never been shared before. Um, History is complicated. It's interesting. I tried to make this in a way where it's actually fascinating for you to read and enjoyable for you to read. It's not a dry read at all, and it's pretty straightforward. I tried to make it fun. I tried to make it informative. There's so much in here. I look at the table of contents and it makes me smile because it talks about, Egypt's eyes and ears. It talks about biblical and Greek espionage. It talks about medieval intelligence. Again, Sun Tzu, Genghis Khan. I mean, it's really special. And then I like this fact that chapter 7 is the unsung heroes of World War II. And that's, you know, it really goes into, again, the women. It goes into folks like Alan Turing, who helped solve the Enigma machine puzzle and the codes associated with that. These heroes that were unique, but maybe they didn't fit the look or image of the time. He was a gay man back during World War II. And after the war was over, even though he did these heroic things, he had really bad things happen to him. He was chemically castrated and he died at a very young age. And he wasn't given his recognition until about 45 years later. So you have people, again, that are going above and beyond, even when they're not treated the way we would hope they would be.
Hmm. And definitely the book is like a small encyclopedia, I think, of the whole, I guess, the whole spying system, right? And how it functioned during that time of history. And I also think, by the way, it's a good read so maybe as a father, read to your child or as a mother to your child, right? It's very fascinating, as you say, for all age groups. I think that makes it very unique as well. And Dexter, last thing as well is reading the book, right? You speak about all the times of history, many, many years back, all different types of people. Now, I didn't catch any story which was your own. Will there ever be a book where you're going to mention some of your own stories?
Yeah, I would love to write that book. We have a book coming out in a little over a month that kind of talks about national security careers, and I actually tell some stories in that book. But it's not a memoir. I think eventually down the road, you know, inshallah, that the memoir will come out. But yeah, I have some stories I can tell too, and I really love sharing a lot of those stories with young people. Hopefully, it motivates them and gets them thinking about doing things they never thought of before. They think about service, they think about languages, they think about, just travel, all aspects of it. So absolutely, Cassian.
I'm very good, Dexter. So where can they buy it? That's the last thing.
On sale at Amazon. You have the ebook, and you have the paperback right now. I'll have it narrated probably within the next 2 weeks as well. So there'll be the audiobook, and the International Spy Museum sells it as well. So you can get it both online and in the store there. It looks like we'll be having a book signing in September, so super excited about that. Thanks, Cassian.
Amazing. Well, very nice talking to you, Dexter, and speak to you very soon.
Thank you.